The thunderous crack of leather against flesh silenced the town square of Willow Creek, Colorado, as Frances Caldwell's knees hit the hard-packed dirt, her honey-blonde hair falling in a curtain across her bloodied face. The year was 1875, and the truth, as Frances had painfully discovered, was a dangerous commodity in a town built on secrets. "That'll teach you to spread your filthy lies about the mayor's business dealings," Sheriff Pearson bellowed, coiling his whip for another strike, as the gathered crowd watched with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. Frances lifted her chin despite the pain radiating through her body. "It's not a lie," she said through gritted teeth. "Mayor Wilson is stealing from the mining company. I saw the ledgers myself." Another crack of the whip tore through her sleeve. Drawing a thin line of crimson across her shoulder, Frances bit back a scream, refusing to give them the satisfaction. At 24 years old, she had survived too much to break now. Orphaned at 16 and working as a bookkeeper at the town's general store, she had accidentally discovered discrepancies in the accounts that pointed directly to the mayor's corruption. "I work with numbers every day," she called out to the townspeople who watched her punishment. "The proof is there if you would only look." Sheriff Pearson raised his arm again, but his next strike never landed. The rhythmic thunder of hoofbeats cut through the crowd's murmurs, growing louder as a magnificent black stallion charged into the town square. The rider pulled hard on the reins, and the horse reared dramatically, dust billowing around its powerful legs. "That's enough!" The man's voice carried across the square with an authority that made even Sheriff Pearson hesitate. Frances squinted through her swollen eye to see a tall figure dismounting in one fluid motion. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jawline dusted with several days' worth of stubble. He wore a dust-covered duster coat that had seen better days, and the silver star pinned to his vest caught the afternoon sunlight. "Who the hell are you to interfere with town business?" Sheriff Pearson demanded, still holding his whip at the ready. The stranger stepped forward, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. "The name's Adam Irwin, U.S. Marshal." He flashed his badge, and Frances saw Sheriff Pearson visibly pale. "And public beatings aren't exactly what I'd call proper justice, Sheriff." The crowd parted as Adam approached, his eyes never leaving the sheriff until he reached Frances. Only then did he briefly glance down at her, and she was struck by the intensity of his steel-blue eyes. "Marshal or not, this woman has been spreading dangerous lies about our mayor," Pearson insisted, though his voice had lost some of its previous conviction. Adam knelt beside Frances, keeping his voice low. "Can you stand, miss?" Frances nodded, accepting his offered hand. As he helped her to her feet, she swayed slightly and his arm instinctively went around her waist to steady her. "Sheriff," Adam called out, his voice carrying across the now silent square, "I've been sent to investigate reports of corruption in Willow Creek." "Seems I arrived just in time." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mayor Wilson, who had been watching from the steps of the town hall, stepped forward with an unconvincing smile. "Marshal Irwin, I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. The woman is troubled. We were merely administering some necessary discipline." Adam's jaw tightened. "In my experience, Mayor, folks don't usually beat the truth out of someone unless they're afraid of what that person has to say." He turned slightly to address the onlookers. "This gathering is over. Anyone who lays another hand on this woman will answer to federal law." The crowd began to disperse, though many lingered just out of earshot, watching with undisguised curiosity. "You can't just ride in here and overturn our way of handling things," Pearson protested. But there was a nervous edge to his voice now. "Actually, I can." Adam's hand rested casually on his holstered Colt. "Now, I suggest you go about your business while I see to this woman's injuries." Frances felt the world spinning around her, the pain and fear finally catching up as the adrenaline began to fade. "The ledger," she whispered urgently to Adam, "in the store. They'll destroy it." Adam nodded almost imperceptibly before calling out to the sheriff once more. "And Pearson, I'll be wanting to take a look at the town's financial records, all of them, first thing tomorrow morning." The sheriff's face contorted with barely contained rage, but after a tense moment, he turned and stalked away, Mayor Wilson close behind him. With surprising gentleness, Adam guided Frances toward the nearby hotel. "You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest, miss." Caldwell, she managed through a wincing breath. Frances Caldwell. Well, Miss Caldwell, I think you'd better tell me exactly what you saw in those ledgers. The hotel owner, Mrs. Sullivan, fussed over Frances as Adam helped her to a chair in the lobby. The older woman shot disapproving glances at the marshal, but brought a basin of water and clean cloths without being asked. I've got a room upstairs, Adam told Mrs. Sullivan. Miss Caldwell needs somewhere safe to rest. I'm not taking her upstairs to your room, Marshal, Mrs. Sullivan exclaimed, scandalized. That would hardly be proper. Then I'll take a separate room for the lady, Adam replied patiently. But she needs protection. Frances tried to protest. I can't afford. U.S. Marshal Service will cover it, Adam cut in, though Frances wasn't entirely convinced such an expense would be officially sanctioned. Now, Mrs. Sullivan, that room? Once settled in a small but clean room, Frances sat stiffly on the edge of the bed, while Adam stood by the window, keeping watch on the street below. Mrs. Sullivan had helped clean the blood from Frances's face and left a tray of food that remained untouched. They'll come for me, Frances said quietly. The mayor has too much to lose. Adam turned from the window, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. Tell me everything, Miss Caldwell, from the beginning. Frances took a deep breath and winced at the pain in her ribs. I work as a bookkeeper at Thornton's General Store. Mr. Thornton also handles the accounts for the Silver Peak Mining Company. 3 months ago, I noticed discrepancies in the mining company's ledgers. Money was being recorded as spent on supplies and equipment that never arrived. Adam nodded, encouraging her to continue. I traced the funds to an account in Mayor Wilson's name at the bank in Silverdale, the next town over. He's been siphoning money for at least 2 years, nearly $20,000 in total. She looked up at Adam. The miners work in terrible conditions for barely enough to feed their families, while Wilson builds himself a mansion and buys fancy furniture from back east. And you confronted him? Adam asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Frances nodded. I thought if I showed him I knew, he might stop, return some of the money. She gave a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. Instead, he claimed I fabricated the evidence because he had refused my inappropriate advances. Adam's expression darkened, and the town believed him. Most did, or pretended to. Wilson owns half the businesses in Willow Creek, and Sheriff Pearson is his brother-in-law. Frances reached for the glass of water on the bedside table, her hand trembling. I tried to show the miners the proof, but before I could gather enough of them, Wilson had me arrested for theft. Adam took a step closer, his brow furrowed. Did you take something? No, Frances said firmly. But they claimed I stole money from the store. Mr. Thornton wouldn't speak against me, but he wouldn't help me either. He's afraid. So today was what? A public punishment? Frances nodded, wincing as she shifted position. A lesson for anyone else thinking of speaking out. Adam was silent for a long moment, and Frances found herself studying his face in the fading afternoon light. He was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than his current stern expression would indicate. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. You took quite a risk, he finally said. I couldn't stay silent, Frances replied. My father taught me that. A ghost of a smile touched Adam's lips. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Frances looked down at her hands. He died in the war. My mother passed 2 years later. Adam nodded, a flash of understanding in his eyes. I lost my father at Gettysburg. For a moment, they shared a silence that acknowledged a common pain, a connection formed in the quiet aftermath of national tragedy. Adam finally broke the silence. I need to get that ledger before they destroy the evidence. Where exactly is it? Hidden in the store. There's a loose floorboard under the counter, toward the back wall. Frances started to rise. I should go with you. Adam gently but firmly pressed her back down. You're staying right here, Miss Caldwell. Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone but me. Frances wanted to argue, but found she lacked the strength. The day's events had taken their toll, and exhaustion was rapidly overtaking her. How will I know it's you? Adam thought for a moment, then removed a silver ring from his little finger. It was a simple band with a small turquoise stone. I'll ask for this back. No one else would know about it. He placed the ring in her palm, and Frances closed her fingers around it, surprised by the warmth the metal still held from his skin. "I'll return as soon as I can," he promised, then hesitated at the door. "Try to rest, Miss Caldwell. You're safe now." After he left, Frances dutifully locked the door, then moved to the window where she could see Adam crossing the street toward the general store. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across Willow Creek. For the first time in months, Frances allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. She clutched the silver ring in her palm and whispered a prayer for the mysterious Marshal who had ridden to her rescue. Adam entered Thornton's general store with the casual air of a traveler needing supplies. The elderly shopkeeper eyed him warily, recognition dawning as he spotted the Marshal's badge. "We're closing soon," Thornton said nervously, glancing toward the back room. "Won't take but a minute," Adam replied easily, moving deeper into the store. "Just need a few things for the trail." He pretended to examine canned goods while assessing the layout of the store, locating the counter Frances had described. A movement in the back room caught his attention. Someone else was there. Adam casually shifted position to keep both the shopkeeper and the doorway to the back room in his sight. "You're that Marshal," Thornton finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The one who stopped the sheriff." Adam nodded. "Just doing my job, sir." Thornton glanced nervously toward the back room again. "You shouldn't be here. They'll be coming for the books soon." "So you know about the ledgers?" Adam said quietly, abandoning all pretense. The old man's shoulders sagged. "Frances is a good girl, honest, smartest bookkeeper I ever had." His voice dropped even lower. "What they did to her wasn't right." "Then help me, Mr. Thornton." Adam moved closer to the counter. "I need that ledger she hid." A floorboard creaked in the back room. Thornton's eyes widened in warning just as Sheriff Pearson emerged, his hand resting on his holstered gun. "Well, well, Marshal Irwin, fancy meeting you here." Pearson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Looking for something specific?" Adam turned slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Just stocking up on supplies. Long ride ahead of me." "Is that so?" Pearson stepped fully into the main room. Behind him, 2 deputies appeared in the doorway. "Because I heard you might be looking for some paperwork." "If you mean the town's financial records, I already told you I'd be reviewing those tomorrow." Adam maintained a casual tone, despite the tension crackling in the air. Pearson laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "You know, Marshal, Willow Creek has a way of handling outsiders who stick their noses where they don't belong." "Is that a threat, Sheriff?" Adam's hand drifted slightly closer to his own weapon. "Just an observation." Pearson glanced at Thornton. "Ain't that right, old man?" Thornton nodded jerkily, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Now," Pearson continued, "I think it's time you moved on, Marshal. There's been a misunderstanding about that Caldwell woman. She's not quite right in the head, you see. Has these episodes." Adam felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice level. "Funny how those episodes coincided with her finding evidence of embezzlement." Pearson's face darkened. "You're making serious accusations based on the ravings of a hysterical woman." "I've found that women are rarely hysterical without good cause, Sheriff. Usually there's a man giving them reason to be." Adam's gaze was unwavering. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to." He turned back to the counter, ignoring the palpable tension. As he did so, he caught Thornton's eye. The old shopkeeper glanced meaningfully toward a spot under the counter, then back at Adam. Understanding the silent message, Adam casually dropped his handkerchief and knelt to retrieve it, using the moment to peer under the counter. There, partially visible beneath a loose floorboard, was the corner of a leather-bound ledger. Rising smoothly, Adam pocketed his handkerchief. "On second thought, I'll come back tomorrow when I'm less interrupted." As he turned to leave, Pearson stepped closer, invading Adam's personal space. "This town takes care of its own problems, Marshal. The federal government isn't welcome here." Adam met the sheriff's gaze steadily. "The law is welcome everywhere, Sheriff, even in Willow Creek." Without another word, he walked past Pearson and his deputies, feeling their eyes boring into his back as he stepped onto the boardwalk. He hadn't secured the ledger, but at least now he knew it was still there, and that Frances had been telling the truth. The corruption in Willow Creek ran deep, and the sheriff and his men were clearly part of it. Night had fallen completely by the time Adam returned to the hotel. He knocked softly on Frances's door. "Miss Caldwell, it's Marshal Irwin. I've come for my ring." There was a pause, then the sound of a bolt sliding back before the door opened slightly. Frances peered out, her face pale in the lamplight, the swelling around her eye more pronounced now. "Did you find it?" she asked anxiously as she let him in, quickly closing and locking the door behind him. Adam shook his head. "Pearson and his men were there, but I saw where you hid it. It's still there for now." Frances handed back his ring, which he slipped onto his finger. "They'll destroy it tonight. I know they will." "Not if we get to it first," Adam replied, surprising himself with the we. Typically, he worked alone, keeping civilians as far from danger as possible. But something about Frances Caldwell's courage had stirred his admiration. "You want me to go with you?" Frances asked, her eyes widening. "You know the store better than I do, and you know exactly what we're looking for." Adam studied her face. "But only if you're up to it. Those injuries—" "I'm coming," she said firmly. "This might be our only chance to prove what's been happening." Adam nodded, impressed by her resolve, despite her obvious pain. "We'll go after midnight when the town is asleep. I'll create a distraction to draw away the deputies who are surely watching the store." Frances moved to the window, peering out at the darkened street below. "This isn't your fight, Marshal Irwin. Why are you risking so much for a town you've just arrived in?" Adam was silent for a moment, considering the question. "I've seen too many small towns like this one fall under the control of men who think they're above the law. Good people suffer while a few profit." He joined her at the window. "And I believe in justice, Miss Caldwell, just as you do." Their eyes met in the dim light, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared principles that transcended their brief acquaintance. "Adam," he said quietly, "if we're going to be breaking into a store together, you might as well call me Adam." A small smile touched Frances's lips, transforming her face despite the bruises. "Then I'm Frances." They spent the next few hours planning their approach, Adam impressed by Frances's sharp mind and practical suggestions. As midnight approached, he helped her bind her ribs more securely with bandages from his saddlebag and offered her his spare shirt to replace her torn one. Frances disappeared behind a dressing screen to change, and Adam respectfully kept his back turned, though the simple intimacy of her wearing his clothing stirred something within him that he hadn't felt in years. When she emerged, his blue shirt hung loosely on her smaller frame, the sleeves rolled up several times. She had pinned her honey blonde hair up under a cap she'd found in the room, and with her face partially shadowed, she might pass for a young man from a distance. "It's not much of a disguise," she admitted, "but it's better than being immediately recognized." Adam nodded, trying not to notice how the blue of his shirt brought out the color in her eyes. "It'll do." "Are you ready?" Frances took a deep breath, wincing slightly at the pain in her ribs, but her gaze was determined. "Yes." They slipped out the back stairs of the hotel and into the alley behind it, keeping to the shadows as they made their way toward the general store. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to navigate by, but also increasing their risk of being spotted. As they approached the back of Thornton's store, Adam held up his hand, signaling Frances to stop. Two deputies stood smoking on the boardwalk in front of the store, confirming Adam's suspicion that they were guarding the building. "Wait here," Adam whispered. "When you see the deputies move away, count to 30, then go in through the back door." Before Frances could protest, Adam had disappeared into the darkness. She pressed herself against the wall of the adjacent building, heart pounding as she waited. Minutes later, a loud crash and shouts came from the saloon across the street. The deputies immediately straightened, exchanging words Frances couldn't quite make out, before hurrying toward the commotion. She counted to 30 as instructed, then darted across to the back door of the store. It was locked, but Adam had anticipated this and given her a small set of picks. With trembling hands, she worked at the lock, relief flooding through her when it finally clicked open. The store was dark and silent as Frances made her way to the counter, guided by memory and the faint moonlight streaming through the windows. She knelt, feeling beneath the counter for the loose floorboard, wincing as pain shot through her injured ribs. Her fingers found the edge of the board and pried it up. Reaching into the small space beneath, She felt the smooth leather cover of the ledger and pulled it out, clutching it to her chest. "I'll take that." Frances froze at the sound of Mayor Wilson's voice. A match struck, and suddenly the store was illuminated by the glow of a lamp. The mayor stood in the doorway to the back room, a revolver pointed directly at her. "I had a feeling our Marshal friend might try something like this," Wilson said, his voice eerily calm, "though I didn't expect him to send a beaten woman to do his dirty work." "He didn't send me," Frances replied, slowly rising to her feet, still holding the ledger. "This was my idea." Wilson smiled thinly. "Always the brave one, aren't you, Frances? That's what I admired about you, before you became a problem." He extended his hand. "The ledger, please." Frances took a step backward. "So, you can destroy the evidence?" "Evidence of what? Some accounting errors?" Wilson laughed. "No one will believe you, Frances, even with that Marshal backing your story. I own this town." "Not for much longer," Frances said, her voice stronger than she felt. Wilson's expression hardened. "The ledger. Now, or I'll finish what the sheriff started this morning." Frances glanced toward the front door, wondering where Adam was, if he'd been caught in whatever distraction he'd created. "He's not coming," Wilson said, reading her thoughts. "My men have instructions to keep him occupied." Frances's mind raced. The back door was still open behind her. If she could just stall a little longer. "Why, Mayor Wilson?" she asked, taking another small step backward. "Why steal from the miners? They barely make enough as it is." Wilson scoffed. "Because I can. Because this god-forsaken town in the middle of nowhere was meant to be just a stepping stone. I have political ambitions beyond Willow Creek, my dear, and those require capital. So you built your future on the backs of men who risk their lives every day," Frances said, disgust evident in her voice. "The way of the world, Frances. The strong prosper, the weak serve their purpose." Wilson took a step closer. "Now, for the last time, give me the ledger." Frances tensed, preparing to run, when a voice from behind Wilson made them both freeze. "I believe the lady said no." Adam stood in the doorway to the back room, his Colt revolver pressed against the back of Wilson's head. "Drop the gun, Mayor," Adam ordered. "Slowly." Wilson hesitated, then carefully lowered his weapon to the floor. "Frances, come here," Adam said, not taking his eyes off Wilson. She moved quickly around the counter, clutching the ledger tightly. "You're making a grave mistake, Marshal," Wilson said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "I have friends in the territorial government who won't take kindly to this interference. I'm sure they'll be fascinated to hear how you've been embezzling from the mining company," Adam replied coolly. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Mayor Wilson, you're under arrest for corruption, embezzlement, and the assault of Frances Caldwell." "You can't prove anything," Wilson snarled. Frances held up the ledger. "Actually, we can." Adam secured Wilson's hands behind his back, then guided him toward the front door. "Frances, stay behind me." They stepped onto the boardwalk to find a small crowd gathering, drawn by the commotion at the saloon. Sheriff Pearson pushed through, stopping short at the sight of the mayor in handcuffs. "What the hell is this?" Pearson demanded, his hand moving to his gun. "I wouldn't," Adam warned, his own weapon still drawn. "Mayor Wilson is under arrest, and I have the evidence to back it up." Frances stepped forward, holding up the ledger. "It's all here, Sheriff. Every penny the mayor stole from the mining company." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several miners pushed their way to the front, their faces grim in the lamplight. "Let us see," demanded one, a burly man with a thick beard. Frances hesitated, looking to Adam, who nodded. She opened the ledger to the pages she had marked, pointing out the discrepancies to the miners who gathered around. "These entries show money supposedly spent on new support beams for the West Tunnel. Did you ever see those installed?" The miners exchanged looks, shaking their heads. "And here," Frances continued, turning a page, "is supposed to be for new ventilation equipment. Was that ever delivered?" "No," said one of the miners bitterly. "We've been asking for better air down there for months. Men are getting sick." The crowd's mood was shifting, anger now directed at Wilson rather than Frances. Sheriff Pearson seemed to sense the change. "Now hold on," he said, raising his hands. "This doesn't prove anything. Could be mistakes, that's all." Mistakes that always benefit the mayor? Adam asked skeptically. And what about the matching deposits in his Silverdale bank account? Wilson's face paled. How did you— I wired the bank this afternoon, Adam cut in. They confirmed regular deposits matching the missing amounts from the mining company. Francis stared at Adam in surprise. He'd never mentioned contacting the bank. Sheriff Pearson looked between Wilson and the increasingly hostile crowd, then at the marshal's unwavering gun. His shoulders slumped slightly as he made his decision. "Deputy Clark," he called, "take the mayor to a cell." "You can't be serious," Wilson exploded. "Pearson, you know what this will mean for both of us." The sheriff avoided Wilson's gaze. "I'm just doing my job, Mayor." As Deputy Clark led the protesting Wilson away, Adam finally lowered his weapon, though he remained alert. Pearson turned to Adam. "I'll be watching you, Marshal. One wrong move and— "And what, Sheriff?" Adam interrupted. "You'll beat me in the town square, too?" Several townspeople looked away, shame evident on their faces. Francis felt a swell of vindication mixed with sorrow for a community that had allowed fear to override their sense of justice. "The territorial judge will be here in 3 days," Adam continued. "Until then, Mayor Wilson stays in jail, and Miss Caldwell remains under my protection." Pearson opened his mouth as if to argue, then thought better of it. With a final glare, he turned and followed in the direction his deputy had taken Wilson. The crowd began to disperse, though several miners approached Francis, awkwardly offering apologies for not standing up for her earlier. One older man, who introduced himself as Jacob Miller, the miners' unofficial spokesman, took her hand. "We should have listened to you, Miss Caldwell. You showed more courage than the lot of us combined." Francis squeezed his calloused hand. "It's not too late to make things right, Mr. Miller." As the last of the townspeople drifted away, Adam gently guided Francis back toward the hotel. The adrenaline that had sustained her was fading, and she leaned heavily against him, the ledger still clutched in her arms. "You did it," Adam said quietly. "You stood up to them and won." "We did it," Francis corrected, looking up at him. In the moonlight, his face seemed softer, the hard lines of determination replaced by something warmer. "How did you know about the bank account?" Adam smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his features and made Francis's heart beat a little faster. "I didn't." But Wilson didn't know that. Francis laughed despite her pain, feeling lighter than she had in months. "That was quite a bluff, Marshal Irwin. Sometimes in this job, you have to trust your instincts about people." His eyes met hers. "And my instincts told me you were telling the truth from the moment I saw you in that square." They had reached the hotel, but neither seemed eager to go inside just yet. The night was cool and clear, the stars brilliant overhead, and for the first time since she'd discovered the discrepancies in the ledger, Francis felt truly safe. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing me when no one else would." Adam's hand found hers, his touch gentle. "Truth has a way of making itself known, Francis. All it needs is someone brave enough to speak it." In that moment, standing beneath the star-filled Colorado sky, Francis felt something shift between them, a connection deeper than gratitude or shared purpose. And as Adam's eyes held hers, she knew he felt it too. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of activity. Adam sent telegrams to the territorial governor and the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver, detailing the corruption he'd uncovered. Francis, despite her injuries, worked tirelessly with him to organize the evidence against Wilson and identify all the funds that had been misappropriated. They established a temporary office in Adam's hotel room, spreading papers across the small table by the window. Francis was surprised by how easily they fell into a rhythm together, her eye for detail complementing Adam's strategic thinking. "Look at this," she said late on the second afternoon, pointing to an entry in the ledger. "These equipment purchases were supposedly made from Hartford Supply in Denver, but I've never seen any invoices from them." Adam leaned over her shoulder, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of his soap. "Could be a fake company, a way to funnel money directly to Wilson." Francis nodded, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through her at his proximity. "I'll check if there's any record of them in the store's correspondence." As she reached for another stack of papers, her hand brushed against Adam's. He didn't pull away, and for a moment, they remained frozen in that gentle contact, neither willing to break it. A knock at the door startled them apart. Adam cleared his throat and went to answer it, revealing Mr. Thornton standing nervously in the hallway. "Marshal, Miss Caldwell," the shopkeeper said, twisting his hat in his hands. I wanted to apologize for not speaking up sooner." Frances rose from her chair, wincing slightly as her ribs protested. "You've nothing to apologize for, Mr. Thornton. You were afraid, like everyone else." "But you weren't," Thornton replied, admiration evident in his voice. "And I should have stood by you." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small packet of papers. "These are all the correspondence with suppliers for the last 3 years, including the real invoices Wilson told me to hide." Adam accepted the papers with a nod of thanks. "This will help tremendously, Mr. Thornton." The old shopkeeper hesitated, then added, "There's talk in town. Not everyone's happy about Wilson being locked up. Sheriff Pearson's been drinking heavy at the saloon, making threats." "What kind of threats?" Adam asked sharply. "Just be careful, both of you." Thornton glanced anxiously down the hall. "Some men don't take kindly to losing power." After Thornton left, Adam checked his revolver and placed it within easy reach on the table. "Maybe we should move you somewhere else," he said to Frances. "Somewhere safer." "There is nowhere safer than right here," Frances replied with quiet certainty. "With you." Their eyes met, and the tension that had been building between them over the past days crackled in the air. "Frances," Adam began, his voice lower than usual. "When this is over—" Another knock interrupted him, more insistent this time. Adam sighed and opened the door to find Deputy Clark. "Marshal, there's trouble at the jail. The sheriff's drunk and threatening to release Wilson." Adam grabbed his hat and gun belt. "Stay here," he told Frances firmly. "Lock the door and don't open it for anyone but me." Before she could protest, he was gone, following the deputy down the stairs. Frances paced the small room anxiously, torn between following Adam's instructions and her fear for his safety. After nearly an hour with no word, she could stand it no longer. Ignoring the pain in her ribs, she made her way downstairs and out onto the street. The scene at the jail was chaotic. A crowd had gathered, shouting and jostling. Frances pushed her way through until she could see what was happening. Sheriff Pearson stood on the jailhouse steps, swaying slightly, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. Beside him, Mayor Wilson stood with his hands free, a triumphant smirk on his face. Adam was nowhere to be seen. "This man," Pearson bellowed, gesturing wildly at Wilson, "has been falsely accused by an outsider and a woman with a grudge." A chorus of agreement rose from some in the crowd, shopkeepers and businessmen who had benefited from Wilson's favor over the years. But the miners and their families remained silent, watching warily. Frances felt a surge of anger cut through her fear. She stepped forward into the open space before the jail. "That's a lie, Sheriff, and you know it." All eyes turned to her. Wilson's smirk faltered slightly. "The ledger doesn't lie," Frances continued, her voice gaining strength. "Neither do the bank records from Silverdale that the marshal requested by telegraph yesterday. Mayor Wilson stole from this town from all of you to line his own pockets." "Hearsay and fabrications," Wilson countered smoothly. "Miss Caldwell has always had an overactive imagination. And as for this so-called marshal, Federal Marshal Adam Irwin," came a voice from the jailhouse doorway. Adam emerged, a slight cut above his eye, but otherwise unharmed. "Duly appointed by the territorial governor, who is most interested in what's happening in Willow Creek." Relief flooded through Frances at the sight of him. Their eyes met briefly across the crowd, and she saw both concern for her safety and pride in her courage. "Sheriff Pearson," Adam continued, "you're relieving yourself of duty, effective immediately. Deputy Clark will assume your responsibilities until the judge arrives tomorrow." "You can't do that," Pearson sputtered. "Actually, I can." Adam held up a telegram. "Direct orders from the governor. Now, hand over your badge and gun, or I'll have to take them." The crowd had gone completely silent, watching the standoff with bated breath. Frances could see Pearson calculating his odds, his hand hovering near his holster. "Don't," Adam warned quietly. "It's over, Pearson." For a tense moment, Frances thought the sheriff would draw. Then, with a muttered curse, he unpinned his badge and tossed it at Adam's feet, followed by his gun. "You'll regret this," Pearson growled. "Both of you." "The only regret in Willow Creek," Frances called out, unable to contain herself, "is that we didn't stand up to you sooner." Several miners cheered at that, and others in the crowd began to nod in agreement. The tide of public opinion was turning visibly, washing away the fear that had kept the town in Wilson's grip for so long. Wilson, sensing his support crumbling, made a desperate move. He lunged for Pearson's discarded gun, snatching it from the ground and swinging it toward Frances. "This is your fault," he snarled. "Everything was fine until you started poking around where you didn't belong." Time seemed to slow as Frances stared down the barrel of the revolver. She heard screams from the crowd, saw Adam reaching for his own weapon, but knew he wouldn't be fast enough. Then, impossibly quick, a shot rang out. Wilson jerked backward, the gun falling from his hand unfired. He looked down in shock at the spreading red stain on his chest, then collapsed. Frances turned to see Mr. Thornton standing at the edge of the crowd, an ancient shotgun in his trembling hands. "No one threatens my bookkeeper," the old man said shakily. Adam was at Frances's side in an instant, pulling her against him protectively as Deputy Clark rushed to Wilson's prone form. "He's alive," Clark announced after checking, "but he needs a doctor." As two men carried Wilson to the doctor's office, the crowd began to disperse, the excitement over, but the town forever changed by what had transpired. Adam's arm remained around Frances's shoulders. "You were supposed to stay in the room," he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only concern and something warmer. "I couldn't let you face them alone," she replied, looking up at him. The cut above his eye was still bleeding slightly, and without thinking, she reached up to gently wipe the blood away with her handkerchief. His hand caught hers, holding it against his cheek. "Frances Caldwell," he said softly, "you are the bravest woman I've ever met." In his eyes, she saw not just admiration, but something deeper, something that made her heart race and her breath catch. And standing there in the dusty street of Willow Creek, with the truth finally set free and justice on its way, Frances knew with sudden clarity that her life would never be the same again. The territorial judge arrived the next day as promised, a stern-faced man named Judge Hammond, with a reputation for fairness and a hatred of corruption. The trial was held in the town hall, packed to capacity with eager spectators. Mayor Wilson, pale and bandaged but well enough to stand trial, pleaded not guilty despite the overwhelming evidence against him. Sheriff Pearson, facing charges as an accomplice, was more pragmatic and offered to testify against his former brother-in-law in exchange for leniency. Frances took the stand on the second day, her bruises still visible but fading, her voice clear and unwavering as she detailed her discovery of the embezzlement and the subsequent threats and assault. Adam sat in the front row, his steadfast presence giving her strength. "And you risked your own safety to bring this corruption to light?" Judge Hammond asked her. Frances nodded. "I believe the people of Willow Creek deserve to know the truth, Your Honor." The judge studied her for a moment, then smiled slightly. "The territory needs more citizens with your courage, Miss Caldwell." When Adam testified, presenting the financial records and the telegrams from the Silverdale Bank, confirming Wilson's secret accounts, his professional demeanor was impeccable. Yet whenever his eyes met Frances's, there was a warmth there that had nothing to do with the case. After 3 days of testimony, the verdict was decisive. Wilson was found guilty of embezzlement, corruption, and assault, sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison. Pearson received 3 years for his role in the cover-up and for abusing his position as sheriff. As the courtroom emptied following the sentencing, Mr. Miller, the miner's spokesman, approached Frances and Adam. "The boys and I have been talking," he said. "We'd like to offer you the position of treasurer for the mining company, Miss Caldwell, with a proper salary, of course." Frances was momentarily speechless. I'm honored, Mr. Miller, but I'm not sure if you're the only one with the skills and the integrity we trust," Miller continued, "and we need someone to help us recover the stolen funds and put them toward improving conditions in the mine." Frances glanced at Adam, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. They hadn't spoken about what would happen after the trial, after his duty in Willow Creek was complete. "I'll consider it," she promised Miller. "Thank you for the offer." As Miller walked away, Adam stepped closer to her. "It's a good opportunity," he said quietly. "You'd be respected, valued." "Yes," Frances agreed, studying his face. but I'm not sure if Willow Creek is where I belong anymore." Adam hesitated, seeming to struggle with words that usually came easily to him. "Francis, They were interrupted by Judge Hammond, who requested a private word with Adam. Francis watched them walk away, the marshal's broad shoulders tense beneath his coat, and wondered what the future held for both of them. That evening, Francis sat alone in her hotel room, packing her few belongings. The town council had apologized formally for her treatment and offered her back pay for the time she'd been unable to work, as well as compensation for her injuries. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to give her options. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Who is it?" she called, though she already knew. "Adam." She opened the door to find him standing there, still in his marshal's coat but without his hat, his dark hair slightly tousled. He looked different somehow, less the stern lawman and more the man she'd come to know over these intense days together. "May I come in?" he asked. Francis stepped aside to let him enter, acutely aware of the propriety they were ignoring, yet unable to deny herself these moments with him. Adam noticed her half-packed carpetbag on the bed. "You're leaving?" "I haven't decided yet," she admitted. "Mr. Miller's offer is generous, but staying would mean facing painful memories," Adam finished for her. Francis nodded. "And what about you? I imagine the Marshal Service has another assignment waiting." Adam moved to the window, looking out at the town below. "Judge Hammond offered me a position," he said after a moment, "as the new sheriff of Willow Creek." Francis couldn't hide her surprise. "And will you take it?" He turned to face her, his blue eyes intent. "That depends." "On what?" "On you." Adam took a step closer. "Francis, I know we've known each other only a short time, but these days with you, they've changed me." Francis's heart began to race. "How so?" "I've been a marshal for 7 years, moving from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots." His voice was low, earnest. "I told myself, that's what I wanted, the freedom of the open road, no attachments." He took another step toward her. "But then I saw you in that town square, beaten but unbowed, speaking truth of power despite the cost. And I knew I was witnessing something rare, someone worth stopping for." Francis could hardly breathe as Adam closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I'm not asking you to stay for me," he continued. "That wouldn't be fair. But I want you to know that if you do choose to stay, I'll be here. And if you decide to go, well..." He smiled ruefully. "A marshal's badge can be turned in anywhere." Francis looked up into his face, seeing all the unspoken possibilities there. "Adam Irwin," she said softly, "are you saying you'd follow me?" "I'm saying that meeting you has made me realize what I've been missing." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "And I'm not eager to go back to missing it." Francis felt tears prick her eyes. Not tears of pain or fear this time, but of something much sweeter. "What if I told you I was considering Mr. Miller's offer more seriously than I let on?" Hope brightened Adam's expression. "Then I'd tell Judge Hammond I accept his offer." "And if I had conditions for staying?" Francis asked, a hint of mischief entering her voice despite the gravity of the moment. Adam raised an eyebrow. "What sort of conditions?" "That the new sheriff would take me riding sometimes, out past the town limits where the wildflowers grow. That he'd join me for Sunday dinners." She took a deep breath. "That he'd court me properly, with no rush and no pressure, just time to see if what we feel now can grow into something lasting." A smile spread across Adam's face, transforming it completely. "Francis Caldwell," he said, bringing her hand to his lips. "Those are the easiest conditions I've ever agreed to." In the golden light of the setting sun streaming through the window, Adam's face was close to hers, his eyes asking a silent question. Francis answered by rising on her tiptoes, pressing her lips gently to his. The kiss was tentative at first, a sweet exploration of new territory, but it quickly deepened as Adam's arms circled her waist and pulled her closer. Francis felt as though something locked inside her for years had finally broken free, a capacity for joy she'd nearly forgotten existed. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he murmured reluctantly, "before I compromise your reputation further." Francis laughed softly. I think my reputation in this town has already weathered worse than being seen with the new sheriff. Adam brushed a strand of honey blonde hair from her face. All the more reason to protect it now. I want to do this right, Francis. She nodded, touched by his consideration. Tomorrow, then? Tomorrow, he confirmed. I'll speak with Judge Hammond in the morning, and then perhaps you join me for dinner? To celebrate our new positions in Willow Creek? I'd like that, Francis said, walking him to the door. Adam paused with his hand on the doorknob. Are you sure about this? About staying? Francis considered the question seriously. A week ago, I wanted nothing more than to leave this place. But now, she smiled up at him. Now, I think Willow Creek deserves a second chance. And so do we. Adam's answering smile was all the confirmation she needed that she'd made the right choice. The following week saw a transformation in Willow Creek, unlike any in its short history. With Wilson and Pearson gone, the town seemed to exhale collectively, as if freed from a long-held breath. Adam was sworn in as sheriff, his first official act being to appoint Deputy Clark, who had proved his integrity during the crisis, as his second in command. Francis accepted the position with the mining company, immediately implementing a transparent accounting system and working with Mr. Miller to allocate the recovered funds towards safety improvements in the mine. The miners, who had once averted their eyes when she passed, now tipped their hats respectfully. True to his word, Adam courted her properly. They rode together on Sunday afternoons, exploring the foothills beyond town, where wildflowers carpeted the meadows in purple and gold. He escorted her to church, sat beside her at community suppers, and sometimes simply joined her on the bench outside her new office, content to share comfortable silence after busy days. The town watched their courtship with approving eyes, the romance between the brave bookkeeper and the marshal who had ridden to her rescue already becoming something of a local legend. 3 months after the trial, on a perfect autumn evening, with the aspen leaves turning gold on the mountainsides, Adam took Francis to their favorite spot overlooking the valley. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. It's not fancy, I'm afraid. He opened his palm to reveal the silver and turquoise ring he'd given her to hold, that first night the ring she'd returned to him afterward. This was my mother's, Adam explained. My father gave it to her when they were courting. She gave it to me before she passed, said I should give it to a woman of courage when I found her. His eyes met Francis's. I've found her. Francis felt tears well in her eyes as Adam knelt before her. Francis Caldwell, you showed me what real bravery looks like. You made me want to be a better man, one worthy of standing beside you. Will you marry me? Yes, Francis whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, Adam Irwin, I will. He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if made for her. When he rose and pulled her into his arms, their kiss sealed a promise born in adversity, but flourishing in the peace they had helped create. Their wedding, held in the town church 2 months later, was attended by nearly everyone in Willow Creek. Mr. Thornton, cleared of any wrongdoing in Wilson's schemes, proudly walked Francis down the aisle in place of her father. Judge Hammond returned to perform the ceremony, noting in his address that justice had many forms, and sometimes the most perfect justice was found in love that bloomed from courage. As Francis and Adam exchanged their vows, she looked out at the faces of the townspeople, the miners and their families, the shopkeepers, the ranchers from outlying homesteads. These were the same people who had stood silently by as she was beaten in the town square less than a year ago. But they were changed now, as was she. Willow Creek had learned a hard lesson about standing up for what was right, about the cost of silence and the power of truth. And as Adam's lips met hers to seal their marriage vows, Francis knew that some truths were worth fighting for, worth suffering for, the truth of corruption that she had exposed, yes, but also the truth of the love she had found with the man who had ridden through a crowd to save her. 5 years later, Francis stood on the porch of their home on the outskirts of Willow Creek, watching as Adam taught their 3-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. Their daughter, Elizabeth, just a year old, sat on a blanket at Francis's feet, happily stacking wooden blocks. The town had prospered under honest leadership. The mine now operated with proper safety measures. The miners paid fair wages. Adam had proven himself an exemplary sheriff, firm but fair, respected by all. Frances continued her work as treasurer for the mining company, but now did much of it from home, balancing ledgers while balancing children on her lap. As she watched her husband, his face relaxed in laughter, as Thomas bounced excitedly in the small saddle, Frances marveled at how completely her life had changed from that terrible day in the town square. The physical scars had faded, though sometimes her ribs still ached before a storm. The emotional scars had healed too, transformed by Adam's love and the community's redemption. When Adam looked up and caught her watching, his smile was as warm as it had been on their wedding day. He lifted Thomas from the pony and carried him toward the porch, their son chattering excitedly about his adventure. "Mama, did you see me? I rode like Papa." Frances laughed, reaching out to ruffle Thomas's dark hair, so like his father's. "I saw, darling. You're a natural." Adam set Thomas down beside his sister and climbed the porch steps to stand beside Frances. His arm slipped around her waist, drawing her close. "Happy?" he asked softly, his lips close to her ear. Frances leaned into his embrace, watching their children play in the golden afternoon light. "Completely," she answered truthfully. Behind them, Willow Creek spread out in the valley, the church steeple catching the sunlight, the mine operating safely in the distance, the streets bustling with honest commerce. Before them, their children represented the future, a future built on truth and courage and love. "I sometimes think about that day," Frances admitted quietly. "What if you hadn't ridden through town at that exact moment?" Adam's arm tightened around her. "Then I would have missed my life's greatest blessing," he said simply. "But I did ride through, Frances, and I will always be grateful that I did." As the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Frances turned in her husband's arms to kiss him, a kiss filled with the same passion and tenderness as their first, yet deepened by the years and experiences they had shared. Their life together had begun in a moment of violence and injustice, but it had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. And as Adam lifted little Elizabeth into his arms and took Thomas by the hand, leading his family inside for dinner, Frances knew that the greatest truth she had ever spoken was the "I do" she had whispered at the altar. For in that simple phrase lay the promise of all that had followed the home, the family, the love that had transformed not just her life, but an entire town. The woman who had been beaten for telling the truth had found her happy ending with the cowboy who had ridden through the crowd for her. And in that ending was also a beginning that renewed itself with each passing day, a testament to the enduring power of courage, justice, and love.